Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is Lou Maxon, and Lou is the creative director of Maxon House. Now, Maxon House has all kinds of really interesting stuff going on, and we met actually via Instagram, and that was because of somebody else that I'd recorded on the podcast, and we'll get into that story as we go. Now, as a creative director, Lou works with all kinds of international brands and national brands throughout the US and around the globe. And obviously award-winning, he's very, very successful at what he does and has a lot of fun and joy in bringing his product and his creativity to life. Lou, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Excited to dig in.
Yeah, me too, man. I've been waiting for this. I mean, we put it off for a couple of days and I'm like, no. I need that dopamine hit.
Especially on a Monday.
Yeah, let's drive that thing. Let's start out with, if you could tell us a little bit about you as a young child, obviously, and then how you kind of bumped into your creative journey or how your creative journey consumed you, one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was fortunate. I was born, I spent like the first, literally 10 years of my life before actual computers came in, right? So in 84, the Macintosh came out, which is like a huge milestone for just like technology. So I was a kid who was like going into elementary school, and we had like early Apple IIe and different like iterations of Apple computers. So that was really like my foray into understanding that I could use technology to sort of express either writing or creating. Like they had this program called Lego Logo, where you could literally put in commands into the computer. It would be hooked up to like little robots, and you can make them move with like computer instructions. I thought like that. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so I think I had an interest in the technology before maybe I had an interest in understanding that I wanted to do something creative. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until sort of later, probably past 10, getting into like mid-teens, that I discovered that I loved just like the creative arts, like putting on like a puppet show or trying to figure out how things worked, or writing or creating things. It was in high school that a couple of friends of mine came to me because they knew I could kind of make my way around, I guess it would be early like desktop publishing. And they wanted to put out this little magazine, like little zine.
Yep.
And so they needed someone that could actually produce it. And we did this alternate like school publication, not funded or authorized by the school. Got in a lot of trouble. And I think
use their logo. Use the school logo.
So I've been in trouble since the beginning, really. But I think I got like a flavor that I could use this. I could use how I express myself married with technology, not necessarily to get in trouble, but to express either myself or help other people express, their stories. I later sort of found out from both my dad and my uncle and my grandmother that like our family, my great grandfather was one of the original Mad Men.
If you want to talk about Mad Men, yeah, my dad was a Mad Men.
Yeah. And so in Detroit, and he had Heinz as a client for 30 years, which is like unheard of today.
Well, those are the good old days. Those were the good old
Yeah,
days.
yeah,
People were
yeah.
loyal, and you banked your brands, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And so I've joked before telling this story that, when other like, teenage boys are getting different copies of different kinds of magazines at that age, like my uncle would give me copies of Communication Arts, which was,
Oh yeah, I know the magazine. Yeah, we used to
yeah,
used to lie around
yeah.
our house as well.
Yeah, look, so then I find myself like looking at through the pages and trying to recreate some of the like draw
Mm-hmm.
or write or so then I've married sort of like this history with the passion that I was already having because of what was possible with technology. And it was really, I think it was a pivotal moment my senior year of high school of being brought into the office to talk about this alternative zine and thinking like, I think this is what I want to do. Like, and
Not
I kind
just
of taught
because you
myself.
were going to be the center of attention in the office all the time.
No, yeah, no, I didn't. I was actually quite terrified of like that specific moment. But we actually navigated it because we had gone to the school beforehand and said, there's no publications here. Could you sponsor a faculty member to help us? Could we have things we want to say and do, but we don't really have a way to do it
I
in the
don't know
current.
platform.
Yeah, and they were like, no way. And so we went and did it anyway. And then when we got in trouble, we came back in and we said, well, we did ask, for support. And so out of that experience, they did end up sort of hearing us out and facilitating some programs at the school to create an outlet,
Right.
like a newspaper. But it was at that moment that I realized as I was getting ready to look to go to college that like, is this something that I could do, in college, not even like for a job, but just like, could I continue and maybe could I either smooth out or further roughen edges that I had at the college level. And my goal was actually to get onto like the paper or whatever to write. But because I sort of taught myself enough to be dangerous in like designing and layout that I was kind of doing both. So, but I went to college to study journalism. I already kind of had a head start because of high school. And by the time I got to the upper level, I guess the 300 level classes where you really start digging in deep into your major, I remember the professor was like, well, we have this class called editing and layout, but you already know more about layout than we teach. So why don't you just teach the layout part and then we'll teach you the edit part. And then I kind of got a preview between my junior and senior year. I went to New York to work at a couple magazines, to intern at a couple magazines. And I was meeting with a couple different people in New York, and I saw what you needed to get to the next step, which is like to have a portfolio. I was like, well, I'm not going to get that in my current setup at school. So I started another magazine.
So that you'd have a bit of width in your offer.
Yeah, exactly. And the classic chicken and egg thing is like, you can't get a job if you don't have a book, and if you don't have a book, you can't get a job. So I was like, why not create this magazine that wasn't just for me, but other people that I knew that were either going into the editing or the design part, where basically I could provide a canvas or a platform for them to get published, quote unquote, to have something.
So they had a book.
Yeah. So they had a book. So I did that. I actually ended up getting it into Tower Records, which was still around at the time. And before I knew it, I had the magazine it was like consignment at Tower across the United States and some Tower Records in the world. So every month I would get a physical letter in the mail that showed how many magazines I sold and a little check, not a lot. And I took that magazine when I graduated to New York, and I shopped around, and I got my first job, like really from that magazine.
Amazing.
It was, and I joke now because on the brand side of things, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, brands have discovered that if you tell actual stories, not just ad stories, but like human true stories, consumers respond, right? Because you're not having to fabricate something to convince someone to consider.
I always think of this as the Melbourne Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Enough truth and enough fabrication, enough romance, but enough truth that you can live that way. And it's an enduring, it doesn't matter what Melbourne stick their brand on. There's a whole age group of people who just know the Melbourne Man and, lighting the cigarette and with his, the glow in his hand and the Western hat. And just, if, on the frontier as such, or not the frontier, in the West, on the plains and in the mountains and stuff. And enduring story of enough truth. And enough romance.
Yeah, it was like this. And it was interesting because we were learning very like objective journalism. Like I'll say like, the cat went up the tree, you call the fire department, the cat gets rescued. It's very, like the journalist is sort of removed from the personality of the narrative. And my last class I took was taught by this woman who worked at the newspaper in Spokane, Washington. And it was more of a magazine, like long form class. And it was in that class that I was introduced to writers like George Plimpton, or like, the Rolling Stone guy who I always forget his name now. Hunter Thompson.
Oh yeah, sure. Right. Yep.
It's not that they became the main spotlight of the story, but they experienced the story by immersing themselves in that world of the subject matter that they were talking about, so they could provide a perspective, not just from the outside, but they really sort of became part of the subculture of that, for Hunter, like for the rock and roll at that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, isn't it? Like I was thinking then, Anthony Bourdain with his adventures food. Yeah. It's as much about Anthony Bourdain as it is about the adventure in food. But he's just the character that glues it together. Yeah. And, if you think of, the show Grand Designs and how the host actually needs to be, it's their story of what happened to them.
Totally.
And then people, again, connect at that point to that story. And I think of that book called Story Brand, where, it's about being the guide, not the hero, making the other thing the hero or the piece of it the hero, and showing your journey through it and your perspective. And then other people go, oh, well, I get that because I feel the same way about those things. Or, and that's your tribe, I suppose, that builds off it. Hunter Thompson's a great example of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I think it's really, I tell people, like, if I go back to a school to speak or talk to students, I say one of the best things about this work, and I'm sure you feel the same way, is that, and when we get to talking about the house, well, I know that Tom Kunduk speaks about this, is that you get to, whether it's your adventure or whether you're going on the adventure with the client, like I get to peek into so many different worlds. It's sort of like you don't have to, I've picked this career, but I've also picked a career where it's all about continually sort of going down these rabbit holes, which is like super fascinating. And sometimes you go down a rabbit hole with a client and then the project ends, but then the rabbit hole continues. Or you sort of put it away and then it comes back later into this other project. But, it's the career is like an ongoing education.
I think you find that sometimes, like in the sort of architectural space, where you do something for a client and then you do something more for a client, but the context of what you do the second time is maybe, the land's in a different spot, the space is different, they've grown, they've changed, it's not that they don't like what they've had, it's what they now know, and the platform's more to step off from, and the rabbit holes you went down then inform the rabbit holes of the future. The love for something deepens, and then it's like, how do we play deeper with that? I think, like you say, with clients, part of the trick is peeling it back to find out where those sparks are before you even start. That's that research that you bring to it. Yeah, okay. It's fascinating.
And I think a lot too is that people, it's sort of like clients or collaborators need sometimes to forget that they're clients or collaborators, right? Like we all like in the day-to-day life, like everybody's like playing a different character in a different play, and sometimes our stories connect and sometimes they don't. But what I find sometimes is that sometimes the best outcomes come when it's not like, whether it's because I get hired by a lot of different people. Sometimes an individual will come to me and say, I want to work with you in a startup capacity. Sometimes an agency, and I've worked at agencies, startups, I've worked in-house at brands. So I get hired by all those environments. And so sometimes when clients come in, whether they come in from an agency or a brand or direct hire to me, it's really like, first it's that figuring out, like, do we want to work together? Are we compatible? Do we share not necessarily the same values, but could we go on this adventure together? Could you be in the foxhole together and not
shoot me?
And then the second thing is that the clients are getting inputs from all over the place, and they're seeing things not just in their category, but they're experiencing things as like a human being, right? First. And so sometimes I find some of the best clients that I've gotten to work with don't fixate on sort of what their competition in just their category is doing, but they're really fascinated. The people who I think really want to disrupt or change or differentiate, they are looking at everything outside of their category and inside, outside. And those are the best clients for me personally, because I'm at the point in my time of working where I'm not really interested in someone hiring me to move the needle from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. I'm here to help people go from 1 to 100 or 1 to 7, and it's gotten to the point where I've had a few projects where literally I'll go in, whether I'm talking to a CMO or CEO, and I'll say, look, if you're interested in just kind of inching along, I'm probably not the right fit, because that's not really where my mind starts. You want
to leap.
Yeah. And I think when we get to talking about architecture and design and in my studio, that's a sort of manifestation of what I'm talking about.
100%.
You have to create the projection, because what you show in your work is sort of most clients, they will hire someone for something that they've already done. I'm sort of interested in clients who are already in that state where they're not even quite sure sometimes even what the problem is or the opportunity is, but they just want to work through and work with someone who's willing to kind of figure it out and is completely comfortable not knowing. I heard this quote a while back. It was part of the Eames documentary, and the guy, someone that was speaking on behalf of the documentary that was in it, said sort of you're hiring me to go on the journey from not knowing to knowing. And I think it's not implicating that neither person on the journey doesn't know anything. It just means that you're completely comfortable that when we start, we don't actually know what the finished thing is yet. And that's okay.
Well, that's
right.
Yeah, that's being the perfect, I suppose, guide, isn't it? It's they're putting their trust in you to journey them and keep them somewhat safe, maybe a few adventures and a few tumbles along the way, but somewhat safe to an outcome. And always, when you're designing a house in a parallel, you kind of go, okay, so we have a piece of land that's always going to inform the home anyway. But then the next thing that we're going to have is there's some sort of budget. And you've been down this road. You've got some sort of dollar figures. And when you start designing, if you you're always going to see what the land can offer. What's the land? Because that's stuck where it is. It's fixed. It's not dynamic. It doesn't change a lot. It's kind of stable. So unlike a marketplace is dynamic. It's changing all the time. This is a fixed item. And so we know where the wind, the sun, the rain, all these other elements will come from. And we can probably predict with a little bit of research if they're likely to put a motorway or a freeway in front of it, like there's some stuff that we can know about what's available to it. And then the next thing is that now we're going to go on an adventure of finding out what matters to you as a human. Now, if we restrain the adventure to something that would only be within a certain number of dollars, and we already will have some restraints around need, but the adventure is discovery. And so that's that journey of not knowing to then knowing. And along the way, you get to, whilst we start out with what's a hierarchy of needs, because a hierarchy of needs will inform a hierarchy of budget spend, that next piece of it is to test the hierarchy of needs to see what form they could take. And I guess that's no different from your process either. It's like, I think it's very aligned.
I mean, in some ways I have a little bit of an advantage because for the most part, I'm not creating like something that someone's going to have a mortgage on for, so I have, we have a little bit more, but there are projects that are considerable. I mean, in some cases, there are projects, in many cases, there's been projects I've worked on that are much more than a house, right? Mm-hmm. And it may be like a film or campaign or something where a lot of money is being spent, and you're creating something that has a very short duration of time to be sort of
noticed and seen.
Yeah. And then it kind of, the best ones stick around. Some vanish and are discovered later on. They're sort of like these like relics of our.
I like all those at the moment because, like Instagram and stuff, I follow a fair bit of stuff that's with Porsche and, Singer and Tull Hill Porsche and stuff. And I get all the old 1970s, maybe 80s Porsche ads, which were really, I imagine, for the American market more than anything, but very kind of like tongue-in-cheek, somewhat sexualized at different points. But they were a really lovely twist on communication of something that was a luxury, taking it out of just being a luxury purchase. They were like, that kind of thing. And it was very, I suppose, clean and simple advertising. And I think about, in advertising, when you get a hook line of a jingle or you get a hook line of something, or in a movie, this kind of point that just stays in culture. And obviously for an advertising, person or marketing person, you're looking for these, not necessarily looking for, you hope to discover these points where you actually embed something with other people, that the story goes beyond. Mazda did zoom, zoom, zoom. I don't know whether they did that in America, but they did it in Australia and New Zealand. And, if somebody says zoom, 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 there's a whole lot of people who go, they've got a Mazda in their head. And you kind of go, that's embedded advertising, man. That's stuff that works.
Part of culture. It becomes,
whether you like Mazda or not, doesn't really matter. They own a little piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, is to get to convince the client that the product or their story can be part of that, like oxygen of culture, right? And some don't want to do that. The ones that do, I think, and then you really have to be thoughtful about how you do it, because we've all seen brands that have forced themselves into culture, and it doesn't. I think that's, for me, because I came from the story part and started in magazines, not in advertising. A lot of the work that I do is, like, I worked on Lexus for like 6 years, and my job was basically, once the ad agency got you to buy or lease a Lexus. My job was to keep you in Lexus, like loyalty.
Yeah.
So I had the advantage of sometimes having the customer acquisition part already been taken care of, and now I'm like caring for the customer and telling stories, like actual stories, not just ads, to keep them engaged with the brand at a cultural level. And I think that is really, and I think, we're seeing it. I mean, I don't know so much. It was very big in Europe. It became pretty big here, where brands would start to create their own magazine essentially for their customers. So if you bought the auto magazine, you'd get them. If you bought a car, you'd get the magazine at home.
Yep.
And in many cases, the magazine actually had nothing to do with the car. I mean, it did strategically, but
yeah.
But
do they still do that?
They some do in different. A lot went digital, but at the height of like when we were doing it for Lexus, it was if you could identify like a Lexus reader, they would be like also like the New Yorker, right? Or so the stories would be, we'd get on a plane and we go to Singapore for a week and follow a chef around Singapore. And it would culminate in the making of like, kind of an Anthony Bourdain type multi-course meal where we would photograph it, we'd film it, we'd create a podcast of it. And like I said, maybe you'd see the car in the periphery, but it wasn't the main character. Really we're like another, like maybe we're like BMW or like Jaguar was about what's happening under the hood. Lexus was about sort of what's happening in front of you through the windshield.
More about the neighborhood than
audience.
Yeah.
Do
you know, I think
that's coming in.
That is storytelling though, eh? Like there's such an interesting parallel there with a couple of things. One was, I remember saying to my wife, a friend of ours bought a Lexus, or a client of mine bought a Lexus. And I remember going to her place and picking up the Lexus magazine. It was sitting on the bench and going, "Oh, can I borrow this, have a read?" She's like, "Yeah, 100%. She said, "I've got a bunch of them." Like they send me them all the time. And I'm like, okay. She goes, you can take it if you want it, like just keep it. And so I did. And I was reading through it, and then something went on, and she said, like, "Oh, no, I've got this Lexus event." And I said, "What's the event?" And she goes, "Oh, look, they get all these business people together and they create this event." And she said, "Really, for me, it's really good for my husband and I, our business, because there's other people that we could do business with in that room, or that we do business with in that room." And I remember saying to my wife, "Do you know, if you're looking for a new car, you should consider," because she's like now, well, at that time she was a business coach, but then a leadership coach in business just for the founders. And now she runs that and just a top-end recruitment agency. And I said, you should really consider whether you go and buy yourself a Lexus, because being in the inside of Lexus puts you with all these other people. And that goes not just locally, but it goes nationally. And, they're going to have this whatever event, and you will be invited to this event. And it just puts you, it's a bit like the difference between sitting in first class, business class, or economy on a plane. If you want to do business, sit in business class, and you will meet other business people. If you sit in first class, you won't meet anybody, because it's not about you meeting other people. You may, but unlikely. If you sit in economy, you'll meet people, but maybe not that are so, business oriented or business focused. And I look at those magazine things and I go, those stories of the brand connection to lifestyle is you're buying into an ecosystem, as opposed to just buying into, I'm driving this down the road. I know, like, how disappointed I can be with a car brand when it loses its way.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like they've let me down, even if I don't own one. I just go,
Yeah,
oh, really, guys? Where did you go?
yeah.
Where did you go? I've got a story about cars, which I think you probably appreciate coming from the Lexus. So I've got a friend, and she used to have a lot to do with Mercedes-Benz. And anyway, one day we were talking about, the car business and stuff. And she said to me, oh, our worst day is when somebody buys an S-Class. And I'm like, why would that be your worst day? And she said, well, they won't buy another car. She said, once they've got to an S-Class, they'd probably see them out. We love them. They've probably bought four other cars from us, or five, or whatever. Their kids are probably all driving them, but they're done. And S-Class is like, it's like driving out in the last thing that you're going to drive, because it will see you through. And I'm like, really? Yeah. And she's like, 100%. She goes, we know when it's coming with clients. We know, because we know them from this period of time. We go, the next call from Lou's going to be for an S-Class. There goes that checkbook. Are we well integrated into the family? Where are we selling cars in this ecosystem?
I mean, I remember when I first started working on the business. I mean, and I'm sure things have changed because I haven't worked on Lexus in a long time. But the perception was, even if you bought the lowest of the totem pole Lexus cars, you were still part of the group, right? Yeah. And I mean, there's it's not just a Lexus thing, but there's strategies. Like when you go in to take your car in for the first service, that first experience is like a huge determination if you're ever going to buy that car again, like how you're treated. And that's what Lexus did really well. But they would also strategically put you in a loaner that was always
a few models up.
Next up. Yeah, because they knew, like, it's, once you've been in, it's hard to, you can't unlearn what it's like to be in the next, in the next. So it's all very, like, I think people don't really think about it, but it's all planned. It's all
It's a choreographed journey. My brother is a commercial photographer, and he lives in Perth. We're both Kiwis, but he lives in Perth, and he was a creative director at agencies in Australia and New Zealand. And he worked on Lexus in New Zealand as one of his projects for quite a few years as well. And I remember him one time making some gizmo that unfolded in a certain way to create this experience of revealing a message. And I remember saying to him, something like, so they're paying you to sit around and, fold up bits of cardboard. We were laughing about it. And he goes, yeah, but how cool is this? And only this number of people are going to get one of these. And yes, they're bespoke, they're almost handmade, but there's only X number that are going to go out. And with that is going to be, those people are then it was an invite to, I think it was the America's Cup or something. But the trick of it was they had thought that they'd get about, say a 50% uptake on the invite, but they got like 100% uptake, and then asked if people could oversubscribe. Was there more spots? So it was very successful, or the event that they were getting people to was very successful. So yeah, really interesting kind of journey. And I really get it. Like engaging your client into something is a beautiful journey.
Yeah, that was, I like to say, like, that was a very dangerous job for me because, it was an agency job. So I worked at an agency with, on it. But the belief was from day one was like, not just to be a creative servicing like a luxury account, but Lexus really wanted you to live as an agency partner in their world. Like, so the first thing I did, honestly, the first week I worked on it, I went to the dealership and we got a car, and we weren't given a car. We
bought a car.
And so I wanted to go through it like a customer would go through it. And when we traveled with Lexus, we traveled like Lexus, and it was, and maybe this is a good gateway to the other things, but it was really working on Lexus that I got to experience a lot of architecture around the world, because we were doing we were shooting stories for the magazine and for the brand. Again, not the advertising, but like things that you'd get if you were a Lexus owner. And so I was getting to travel around the world and shoot in all these places, and we were shooting these amazing places and homes and with all these, chefs and architects and it was on that trip that I sort of said, well, I'm already creatively I'm engaged, but like as someone that's immersed again into this world, like we talked about, like we get to go on these adventures with clients. I became so immersed that I think I just like fell head over heels with the kind of architecture that I was seeing that I wasn't necessarily seeing in my own backyard. Although at the time, I think, the time that I was doing this, like, was really like an emergent time for Olsen Kundig in terms of the projects that eventually I would see when I saw Tom's first book, the first 5 projects. And I remember I had worked on this one specific project, and it was this story in China. And they had hired a bunch of architects to build like a hotel compound near the Great Wall. And I was I was going through and picking all the photography from the shoot. And there was 2 images. There was this one of this like cast in place concrete wall with a single like tree coming out of and then there was this other, and I put them sort of like together, even though they weren't the same project. And I remember just like looking at it, just like mesmerized, like I'd never seen a space like this before in my life. And I kept it with me. And I just thought, I remember telling my wife, maybe one day, we'll like commission someone. Like I want to go find out like who's doing this kind of work.
Right.
And at the time, like Kengo Kuma was one of the architects who had done one of the projects that was featured in this story. And I remember getting back home and it just like, it was one of those moments, where you just, I've done thousands of magazine layouts, there's some that I would go on to like win awards for design, but like this was a specific one that was just like it was like going from black and white to color,
just shifted the perception so far.
It wasn't like any other place or space I had, and certainly not like that I grew up in. And just like that, when you're growing up and you live in your house, like that's your house, right? And so you're not outside like investigating the paneling on the side or looking at the concrete foundation or how you like interact with a door handle or how the space connects to nature. Like those, you don't really think about those things as a kid. You just sort of think about, when I go out, is it easy to go outside? Is it too dark? Is it
wet? Is it dry? Is it like, you just have the greater thing. Maybe unless, I'm sure. I was going to say, maybe unless you maybe were, lived in the Sheets Goldstein house or something like that as a kid. Your expectation when you went around to other people's places would be like, it's not like our place, is it? But do you know what I mean? Like I go, maybe you would be more aware, but I don't know. I don't think that we're as kids, very environmentally aware of the space we're in. We just take it as being the space we're in.
Yeah. I mean, I see a little bit, we have 3 sons who are all, all like college age and above now. And, you see it when they go to college and they go to living in this dorm room and then they come back for a break and it's a different appreciation.
But you've had to give them the other side of it.
Yeah. But certainly like, or like if friends come over, to pick them up or they come over, they're like, oh, it's different, right? Or like, where you really see it is like when the UPS or the FedEx comes or the Amazon and they're like,
what's going on here, man?
Because it's like a brand, right? It's like a really bespoke, different, one of a kind brand that you may stumble on by accident. And and I think and it's not necessarily to stick out. It's actually more to fit in. And I think, I mean, you see, when you go down a street and you see like a normal house, a modern house, it usually sticks out like a spaceship. I think we always had this vision that if we did this, we wanted to make sure that we did it in a setting that wasn't like disruptive to the broader neighborhood, that it was really like, it was more about disappearing into nature than it was about like, hey, look at me.
Yeah.
You know, on a street of like there's a kid's book that we would read our kids, and there was like, it was about this guy who all the houses were the same, and then like he painted his house like purple.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
So it wasn't really like sticking out for that, but I think what's interesting is people have a perception of architecture that's different or modern, it's cold or whatever, and they see the pictures of the house, or they've seen the articles or the Architecture Digest film, and then, you know, they come over and they're like really surprised, like, oh wow, it's actually like really warm, it's really inviting. It looks long and low, but when you get inside, the scale is just like perfect. Or, you know, so you kind of have to, like advertising, right? Like you have to take someone from a perception through to a different perception,
to an experience.
Right? Like that's what we do. Yeah. So it's like, I have to be like the car wash that they go through to sort of like rinse themselves of a perception before they come out and they go, well, actually, this is really interesting. Let's talk about this.
I so get this because, you know, like food and architecture, I think, you know, like you were saying with Lexus, are an amazing pair. One of the things is we eat with our eyes. So we open a cookbook. I mean, I don't know, listeners, tell us how many, if you've got them. How many have you got, you know, 100 cookbooks and you don't use any of them other than to browse through for ideas, and sometimes you cook from it, but sometimes. And we eat with our eyes. We look at these plates of food and we're not even experiencing smell or taste at this point. We're just visually engaged with it. And we'll buy a cookbook based on that. And we'll buy it based on a few ingredients that we go, oh, yes, that's got whatever in it, and I could make that. And with architecture, you have a very similar thing. What happens is you are looking at, whether it be, you know, Pinterest or architectural magazines, or whether it be in brand experience opportunities, or whether it's on Instagram, you're looking at things and you're using your imagination to these things are part of your story, or could be a part of your story, or where would you go to get that into your story? Where would it, you know, exist? But when you feel it, it's just like when you taste it, you know. And I always think of, you know, my wife saying the thing of when you actually taste a meal. So it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter what it looks like. You've eaten it with your eyes. You take some, you put it on your fork, or you pick it up in your hand and you put it in your mouth. And, you know, that thing of just like, whoa, this, you know, as she says, it's like a mouth orgasm. It's just like, boom, all your senses get lit up by this thing. And whether that's lit up like extreme, you know, or whether it's just gentle or whatever, you get an experience that you feel, but you're getting it through your taste buds in this. And when we go into great architecture, the same thing happens. We get to feel the experience of it. And like you said, the room sizes, the program of how it's laid out, it's got mystery, but it makes sense. It's got volume, but it feels just right. It doesn't feel too big. It doesn't feel too small. You know, it doesn't, or it constricts you so that you do get another feeling in the next space. The way something opens or shifts is, of course, it feels natural, but then it reveals as it does it. And you never get bored with that. So we can have the best architectural photography in the world, but we can't actually feel it. We can go on the local project, or, you know, like I'm a host on a TV show that goes and shows houses. And with that, the feeling of it versus what we show is completely different things. You know, like I go into so many houses, and with it, like, oh yeah, this is just, I can critique that. I don't, on the show, but I can critique the design on this is just big. It's just big.
Yeah.
And it's big. It's big for no reason. Just big. Yeah. And that kind of thing where, but then you get somewhere and you go, oh, this is a journey. This is fabulous. This engages me. This takes me somewhere. This was thoughtful. This was considered. This made magic out of the materials. It made magic out of, and I think, we'll talk about your home, but that's the difference. But in a brand sense, when you're creating a brand persona, or when you're delivering on a brand's already cultural persona and shifting it, let it grow without losing its old customers, but gaining its new customers, is part of giving the old ones an experience that takes them on a bit of a journey. The new ones at an entry level can come and grow into the journey.
Yeah.
I find all those things fascinating.
And sometimes, I think, and we'll talk about it a little bit with Tom, but I think, sometimes the best part about it is the part that's most edited back, right? Like you don't, like the big gesture, I think, in our house is different than the big gesture, like in the studio. And, I just did a client project, like an animated film, and the client, like their core, like brand color is red. And so there's a temptation from the start to make everything red. And, I said, actually, it would be more interesting if it wasn't. If we just found like a few moments throughout to accent specific small things.
It's a where's Wally.
And it's also, I think it's like a signature of confidence in the brand that they don't have to like overplay the card, right? Yep. And then there's things in it that the general public will see and just be like, wow, that's cool. I kind of like, they feel like they found it. And then there's things that people who work at the brand, there's things that are also embedded for them. And they'll be like, wow, like we spent the money to do this and they heard us. And they also included some things that only sort of we would know.
Our inside language.
Happy to be part of it. Because the biggest reason things usually fail externally is because they were never loved internally. Like people think about a brand as something other people experience to learn about, but the best spokespeople for the brand are the people who already work there, right? So if you embed those things in the work, then you've got however many people work at the company, thousands of people going out there at a barbecue telling their friends, hey, look at this. And they'll show it and they'll let someone watch it and give a feeling back to it. And then they'll be like, yeah, and remember that those shoes that were on the mat at the front, they were red. And the reason they were red was because we have this thing about our brand and our customers that when they come buy a home with us or whatever, it's like part of their new adventure, like Dorothy, part of their new experience. And I think those are the things that live on, like you talked about earlier, the things that you look back on and go, wow, that thing, remember that thing? Like they sometimes, like I'll just like whistle something and I'll be like, gosh, remember that ad that had the thing? And then you sometimes you don't even remember what the product was, but you have an emotional memory to the brand that brought you that. So, and I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about music, and we used to choose our music by what the album art looked like. We didn't even know
100%.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Elton John.
Yeah. So I'm like,
says it all. Ziggy Stardust says it all. You picked up the album cover and you went, yeah, that's worth my $12 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yep. You just went, this looks exciting.
Yeah. And it's a little bit. And also like you'd put on the record and you may listen to it 100 times, but 100 times you listen to it. Every time you listen to it, there was also a little bit of an imperfection. Like the record might skip in a place or, and you you get perfection listening to Apple Music or Spotify. You get
Well, you do, but you only get a piece of the music. You only get, this is the piece that I feel we're cheated with, is because it's streamed, we're getting this much of the music instead of this much of the music. And, you know, when we go to live concerts, we experience, again, we feel it physically as well as everything else, as well as the context of the crowd. But when we listen to music, it's just the shape of it. It's not the detail of it, because they've streamed that piece out. They did that with CDs, you know, and all these things. And like Blu-ray was our last kind of like, oh, we're holding on. We've actually got the bit where you hear the guy breathe in, or you've got the bit where he just catches his finger on a string, just slightly odd. You've got all those pieces that truly make that, you know, I'm a great Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, and I go, there's, the magic in those recordings that haven't been digitized out. And, you know, once upon a time, they all, turned up in the studio and played it. And if they got it wrong, they did another take. And if they got it wrong and they didn't do another take, it was the way it was. I just actually listened to a podcast, a guy called The Converse Cowboy, and I had him on my podcast, but I've been listening to some of his, and his name's Mike Roberts. Great guy, really interesting. And he was talking about these things of the music nuances with one of his people that he was interviewing. And this guy was doing some tree work in Texas. I don't know there's that many trees in Texas anyway, but he was doing some tree work. And it turns out he was doing it on the 4-6's ranch for Taylor Sheridan, but he didn't know who Taylor Sheridan was. He turns up, does some work. Him and Taylor are chatting about the work that he's doing, you know, chat. And out of that, he says, well, I'm doing the tree work, but I'm a musician and I play, you know, I'm a songwriter and a musician. And Taylor's like, oh, it sounds interesting kind of thing. And through some number of conversations, he goes home and he gets in his garage where he records, and it's not a fancy recording studio. And he writes a song that he does, and he records it, and then he takes it to Taylor and says, there's this song I did. Have a listen. Taylor has a listen. And I don't know how many months later, but there's a call from, you know, Yellowstone's production people saying, oh, we want to use your song. And he goes, no, you can't use my song. I just recorded that in my garage to show what it would be like. And he ends up in a conversation with Taylor, and Taylor's like, we're running it that way, man. We want it real. Yeah. We want it as it is and as it was. I don't want it polished. I don't want it to be, I want it like you played it in a bar, like you played it from your heart. I don't want it as if you're playing it in the stadium to, 300,000 people. I want the real deal here. And it just a lovely story of it's not about over polishing it. It's about delivering it. I always think of Rick Rubin with this. I'm a big fan of Rick Rubin. Yeah. He's like, deliver it, go if it's in your heart, get it, push it through.
Yeah. Throw it out there. Just,
Yeah.
I think there was one you had on the Rubin one that the other day you had on your Instagram, and it was I don't remember, I'll murder the quote, but it was something sort of about like, if you can quantify it, like it's too late. Like you have to, you have to just sort of throw it out.
Trust your creativity.
I think and there were moments in the process of the studio where we wanted to make sure there was a safe experience, with a building that moved. Yeah. But we found out that we almost over-engineered some things, like almost like if you're on a monorail, it's so smooth that you don't feel anything. So we actually took it out. Like we re-engineered moments in the experience.
So it felt real.
So you felt like a little bit of a rumble, a little Johnny Cash, like a little bit, and when people come over and they're on it, they're like, they pick it up, and it's cool because I think it's like the house is such a physical experience, and so you want And, if you do it well, like you said, it should get better with time.
Yes.
And so some of the things that you design into it are not maybe as optimized in like the first day or the week or the year, or even like we're going in 10 years now this summer.
Yeah, wow.
Not 10 years with this, just a couple years with the studio, but and there's things that I can tell you like are way better today than they were
because you've grown with them.
Yeah. And you just sort of learn them, like, and then it's interesting because in a house, you have a fixed thing in a landscape. And so while things are changing in the house, it's more so because of how people interact with it. The landscape is always kinetic.
Yes.
But when you have a studio that physically moves, it's the actual studio changes, if not more, the same more than the landscape, because the building is moving through the landscape, not the landscape moving around them. And I mean, I've never experienced anything like that. So I'm like, every season I'm going through, I'm just like, and then also just nature, like I'll be in my studio and, the way that like animals will come up, in the woods. And they're like, it's kind of like this experiment that's happening every day.
Well, let's talk about the house. Have you got any photos on your laptop that you can share and stuff like that as we talk about it? Computer?
You may have to just post links or something like that, unless you want to pull up their website.
Sure. Well, you can pull it up because then you can navigate it, and I've got you on share so you can share it. So context here is how Lou and I met is a few years ago, I interviewed Tom Kundig on my podcast, and that came through from Mr. Steam. He designed the headquarters for Mr. Steam, and Michael Pincus, through another friend of mine, I met Michael Pincus, and I said, Michael, what would be the chances of talking to Tom, do you think? And he said, I'll see if I can organize it for you. So I did that, and then we recorded this thing. And since then, I went to Seattle, and I've been in Seattle several times since then. I've got great friends who live there. And I went and visited Olsen Kundig and spent a good half a day plus with Olsen Kundig. And also, like I've done the same with Ray Carblow at
Boland,
Sawinski Jackson, or Jackson, Sawinski Jackson, like these guys that I know. And anyway, but just in doing that and experiencing Olsen Kundig's studio, what they do there, all the different things that happen there, it's just absolutely, again, another level of feeling things and experiencing it that way. And so Lou made a comment on the post that we'd put up around the Olsen Kundig thing, because we re-released the podcast onto YouTube and edited it again a little bit and then re-released it. And with that, one of the highlight moments for me was talking to Tom about hot rodding and taking these kind of, I think his comment was something like, if you take the ugliest building you can find and let's do something and make it valid, make it special again. And just things around that hot rodding thing, around it's not about being perfect. It's about sort of a mixture of brutal and beauty that comes together, and how you can do this with architecture as well. And that's, leads into the gizmos and all these things. So Lou reaches out, we start chatting. I'm like going through all Lou's stuff going, oh man, this branding side of things, I'm fascinated by how we create human connection through either words or physical and visual things. And especially when, my job is to do that with things they're going to live in. And Lou takes that little bit to extreme. So he bought a Lexus when he was working on the Lexus account. In this case, what he did is he commissioned Olsen Kundig and Tom to design a home for him. And we're going to see some here. So if you're not on YouTube, make sure you go and watch this piece on YouTube. If you're just listening, we'll try and do our best to explain it. But he has a home that was designed by Olsen Kundig, and there's a story as to how it got positioned. And then he also has a studio, which is on railway track. And for context, he lives in the town of Carnation, well, in the region, the place of Carnation. And Lou would tell this story better than me, but Carnation is where carnation milk comes from. The town was named after the brand, not for any other reason. And so it was a rail town because it used to bring cows and milk and product to there to produce the product. And we all know carnation milk. I'm surprised you haven't done an Andy Warhol kind of like carnation can, like the Campbell's soup can, or some sort of a iteration of that idea. I'm sure you have.
I have a little framed painting of the carnation milk can on my desk, and it's funny because the carnation can is basically a ripoff of the original Campbell's soup can, if you look at it, right? And the story goes that the founder of Carnation, the Steward family, the guy was walking by a shop in Seattle and he saw a cigar box with some carnations on it, and that's how he came up with the name. He just saw like an illustrated cigar box, but yeah, I mean the can is almost literally a ripoff of the original
of the Campbell's soup can.
Yeah, the candles. And so yeah, we have a few artifacts like the old milk carton or some of the ads and so
it's a funny thing that like because I live in Australia and I grew up in New Zealand, and I didn't travel until I was like maybe 20 out of the country. But the first place I went to is I never considered that carnation milk was in anything but a can. And when you just said then a carton, I'm like, damn, yeah, I saw that in America. Because of the fact we never got it in a carton.
Oh, yeah.
Carnation milk was the milk that you bought and you kept in your cupboard in case the apocalypse hit.
Oh, yeah.
It was storable milk. It was long life milk.
My understanding is that they basically invented pasteurized milk.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were, and, because I got to work with the family actually after the brand was sold to Nestle, but their big thing was like, if you, for instance, if you raised cows for meat, right? You never name the cows, right? But
nobody wants to eat Daisy, but they're happy to drink her milk.
They were big believers, and they almost took, I think, better care of the cows than they did maybe the people that worked there. They really, I mean, you could go by, they had like the barns and the stables over there, and they still have some of the old signs up outside, the kind of vintage signs now, but it was like no swearing.
Right. Like, don't cuss around your cow.
Yeah, around the cows. And there's a statue of one of the cows, I think it's Cegis, and it was the biggest, at the time, it was the biggest producing milk cow, I think in the world, was here in Carnation. Yeah, so they really took this idea of like, if you care for the cow will produce better milk.
Well, do you know, like, hey, ahead of their time, that Japanese, I'm trying to think of the thing, so I'm going to butcher this a little. If people are interested, look it up. But there's that Japanese thing of where you put your energy into water and the crystals of the water shift. If you give it love every day, if you shower it with compliments, if you love over the water, that water actually, the crystal shapes change. Whereas if you take it and you hate over the water, the crystal shapes become deformed. And, we are connected through everything, not just online. And, I remember, Prince Charles, now King Charles, he got years ago like hammered in the press for talking to his plants. But we found out from that if you talk to your plants, they're healthier. And then in about 86, the name biophilic design was kind of developed. which was about indoor planting. And we know that having indoor plants increases cognitive response and makes our environment better. So if you put them in classrooms and offices in your own home in the right spaces, then it increases your cognitive response. It's healthy for your brain. So having a chat to something that's healthy to your brain, whether you do it out loud or, silently in your head, is a very viable thing. If you do it out loud, obviously you get to hear it as well as verbalize it. So you get the benefit of it both ways. So I go loving over the cows. Makes perfect sense. It's like Wagyu beef, isn't it? Go and massage those suckers and they'll, yes, we know that that physically does something, but it also does something for the cow. Little does it know it's going to be eaten at that point, but yeah.
No, it's people, I mean, it's always that I live in a town named after a brand. I mean, there's like Hershey, Pennsylvania, where the chocolate is. But if you, and in our town, there's always debate used to call after the Native American who founded it, and then it shifts back to Carnation, and it's gone back and forth. And so the area that we live in is still named after the original Tolt name, but there's remnants in town of Carnation everywhere, like just like in benches and things like that. So it's just. But you would never know. Like if you drove through, you're not going to see cows in a field. So
right. Last year I was in Arkansas, and I was visiting Marlon Blackwell Architects on a tour that we were doing. And with that, a couple of things. One is that we went to Bentonville, Arkansas, which is where Walmart's from. And Walmart's actually relocating their headquarters back to Bentonville, Arkansas. But it is where store number one comes from. Another thing that you said before about working with Tom Kundig and the Olsen Kundig team was it's about the edit. And I said to Marlon, amazing architecture, it's very deliberate, very thoughtful. What's kind of the secret? And he said to me, it's the edit. And I'm like, what do you mean it's the edit? And he's like, well, what you see is what you're left with, and making the right cuts is what's important. It's always the edit in every part of the process. And take us on a journey with your home and the studio. And working with Tom and working with, Phil Turner as well. And Edward, like how that, not necessarily all the details, but just sort of, we say you've made the jump and you've managed to go, we're going to engage these guys. What happened next?
Yeah. So I mean, the famous story is that it was around Christmas, and I had gotten, my wife and I bought this land with the idea, we're gonna build. We lived in like kind of a suburban, like tract house, like stick built, house, and like every great story usually begins with some sort of not like a conflict or opportunity. And we were, at the time we had 2 kids. We were getting ready to, we had our 3rd kid, and the original house was probably great for a family of 4, but it was a little busting at the seams at 5. So the first instinct is like, okay, let's just we'll just go buy a bigger house. Right. And so we started looking, but one of the things that happened was that the area that we lived in was a pretty new development, is out by Snoqualmie, the town of Snoqualmie. And the way that the lines were sort of drawn with the schools was that if we got a house if we bought a new house, then we would sort of have to move our kids out of that school into another school. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, if that's true, then maybe we should sort of widen our search.
If you're going to move the kids anyway,
do the big move.
Yeah. What's the boundary? Yeah.
So we started looking at land, and what we discovered is, even if you buy, usually land here is it's either 1 acre, 5 acres, 20 acres. So even if you buy 1 acre, which seems like a lot, right? Coming off of a little postage stamp corner lot. What you don't consider as someone who has not gone through this is that there's so many restrictions in terms of setbacks and buffers and,
rules and regulations.
You could buy an acre, but after you sort of like done the math and had everybody out, you have like you kind of almost like ironically have a postage stamp spot that you can only locate the house in. Yep. So we found this lot in Incarnation it's 21 and a half acres. Mm-hmm. And 16 acres are set aside for forest management, meaning that you cannot develop on it, but the previous owner who had the land, they went through a forest management plan, which basically means you agree to manage the forest responsibly through FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, and all those things. So when we bought it, we sort of inherited that. And both my wife and I actually went through like Washington State University forest management courses to learn how to upkeep the plan. So after 16 acres are already removed, you basically have 5 or 6 acres left. Yep. Right. So that's your new sandbox. So I had gotten Tom's book. I think, neither my wife or I had lived in a house like this ever before or built a house. Even the house that we built in Snoqualmie, it was a plan. So we had and then you get to pick a few things, right?
Mm-hmm. So customized.
It's
a Lexus, but with these colored seats and these, yeah.
Yeah, it's very like specific. I think it's designed so that even if someone made the worst possible choice, it wouldn't end up correct. Yeah, you can't wreck it. So, I had seen all this really like emerging architecture through my work and travels and doing shoots, and my wife and I kept 2 different notebooks during the research. I think hers would tend to be more of things she had seen maybe from the past that could work in a forest setting. Mine were more things from the present and future. So we had to kind of like heal that, and like you can't, like we even laughed today, like she had pictures in there. I had pictures of some stuff that honestly looked like a spaceship landed in the middle of the forest. And she had things that looked like a traditional like house with maybe a wraparound porch that maybe you'd see like in the South.
Little house on the prairie kind of thing.
Yeah. Neither things were really appropriate for the setting. So when we saw Tom's book, it was like that next thunderbolt, right? And it was this work that looked like it had been there forever, but was still new, but had a real truth about honoring time, and we rallied around it. And then one night my office at the time was in our house we had a 2-story house. So I went into like my office and I went literally onto the website, onto the contact form. And I just wrote like this note and I just said, hey, we've seen this book. We're really curious about this. We've bought this land and this seems like it seems like we should know each other or at least ask, right? And then a month went by or so, and you never know. You hit the button, you send it off, life goes on.
Yeah.
And then we got a message back from, I think it was like the head of marketing at the time. And then a couple months later, then we started having conversations and I think I had a call with Tom, and then eventually, like we had him come out. He came out with project manager Edward Lalonde, who's now an owner, and we met them at a Starbucks where all great stories start, right? in our town, because at that time we had sold our house. We had sold our house, and we had moved to Carnation, and we were renting a house. Our kids could finish school and we could sort of migrate over to start living in the town that we were going to build this house or design and build this house with. And they came up to the site, and it was our site is about 440 feet above the valley.
All right.
And it's an old Weyerhaeuser tree farm. So it's second growth. The previous owners really like they were going to build, we saw the original sort of floor plan and elevation, and they were going to build like a huge house with like an elevator, and they were going to cut right through the woods. And that was not our vision. It was pretty overgrown. There was an original logging road that you would access to get to the house site, or the proximity of the house site. So, but you couldn't see up. Like you looked up and it was just the forest was like caving in on you. So we So we walked down, it's about 600 feet. And this was all our whole, me and my wife, our three boys who were young, and Tom and Edward. And I remember we got to kind of like the general area, and we had talked about prefab. We had people come out. We had talked to a few different architects, and when everybody would come out, they would always retreat back into the woods, like hundreds and hundreds of yards away from the slope, because we're basically like 1/3 of our site is at the top, and then it drops down into the valley. So the spot where you build, that's also not protected by forest management, was at the top, but we're on the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just like Tom walked literally right up to the corner. Edward handed him the measuring tape, and he literally walked along the
kind of
slope.
front ridge. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and pulled the tape out and said, like, this is it. And I think, it's like, I equate it to like, if you're at the doctor, and something, you need something done, like you want to experience the confidence that doctor has, right? Like, you don't want the doctor wavering, like, I don't know, should we? And we felt that.
Should we chop off the leg, or should we keep the leg?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think we felt that with other folks that we had talked to, like, no, like, you're the expert. Like, we want to know. And Tom was quick to sort of say, like, look, it's going to be, he's like, this is where it should go. And it's going to be more expensive because you're going to have to do things like geotechnical studies. You're going to have to like, but if you put it here, like, this is the best spot. And he walked us through it, and we're like, great. Like, you want that. I think there's like a line between like being sort of like arrogant about that your experience, or a line between being confident because you, like, to your point, he's walked these sites a million times, not ours, but
he's been on many sites. And also, like, from his mountaineering background and everything else, he's used to experiencing nature. He's used to operating in nature and experiencing it, not just looking at it. He's been very much a part of it. Yeah. For sure. And I think maybe on your podcast or other podcasts, maybe he'll reference things like sort of aggressively, but not in an aggressive manner, but he's just sort of embraces his like nature in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think he's like, you're going to have to do a lot of work here. You're going to have to, and drill. And I was like, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah, but it'll be more valuable because it'll be connected more to the site. But you just, maybe I'll say you and Kim, my wife's name, you just need to sort of be willing to embrace this site in a different way than maybe where you lived before, right? Like, that you're not going to have that like formal, lawn outside.
Yeah.
You've
used your lawn.
Yeah. So, and then they came back to
your rental.
They'd come back to our house, see I guess it was right before we sold our house. They come back to our house that we were living in, sort of got to see like how we were living in 23 or 2,400 square feet. Our house that we did with them is like 3,000 square feet. So it's not that much bigger, but it's not 2 floors, and there's no extraneous rooms. It's a 4-bedroom house with a den, and then off we went. It was I think the architectural process of like concept to schematic to design development to construction is very similar to maybe my work in terms of like concept R&D, sort of like conceptual, like you do 3 options, you sort of narrow down, you pick, and then you travel with that option. But I think with Tom and Olsen Kundig and Edward is like this spirit of evolution. I think maybe he would call it evolution, not revolution. Like your project is building. When you're hiring them, you're not hiring them to just do your house. you're hiring them for every house they've ever done, right?
Yes.
So like the collective DNA of good and bad that they've learned, you're getting the benefit from, and then not only are you getting the benefit, from that immediate team, which is very small, but you're getting the collective benefit of the whole firm because they have introduced and had part of their history this moment between either conceptual and schematic, or schematic and design development, where they bring the project into they introduce and basically pitch the project to the firm in a crit. Yeah, and which allows for some, I guess, maybe some people that aren't in it on a day-to-day to sort of figure out if there's ways to innovate at that moment, to not just to be like, hey, it'd be cool if you did this, but then nothing happens, but to actually impact, to have like moments of impact. And so it's just like a really fascinating process. And there's
did you get to go to the crit?
Yeah, actually I did, because there was a group that I worked with in my brand work, and they actually filmed it.
Wow.
Because they were documenting sort of the experience going through. And so I was more like a fly on the wall, kind of seeing how, but it was interesting because they were also at that point during the crit, I would say like 2/3 of the crit was about the house, but then the last third is when we talked about the studio, which was going to be a detached building from the house that could become part of the house by way of using a railway to connect from the house back out into the forest, so that I could go and work in the studio, like physically leave the house out of the master bedroom on a platform that nested with the studio. And then if I needed more privacy or just time, I could operate the studio somehow. At that point at the crit, we didn't know how, and then like scoot out into the woods, right? And then work. And then when I was done, I could come back, right? That would be my commute. So Phil Turner was at the crit, and they basically create a few different questions to answer during that time. So like, do we set the house on top, sort of like on top of the prospect view? Do we anchor it into the side
into
of the
hillside? Yeah. Do we set it up? Do we set it down? Do we keep it level? Do we drop it? Yeah. Does it disappear? What would we lose by what was behind us versus what was in front of us by the height of how we set it? Yeah.
Yeah, all those things. And so I think there were like 3 different questions around that, around how to kind of anchor it into the site. And then our site is interesting because we have a like 430-foot drop off the front, but on the elevation, we also have a drop where the house basically leaves foundation and cantilevers, 60 feet.
Yeah.
And so, nature can kind of move underneath and through the house. Mm-hmm. And then we also had challenges in terms of, we had to make sure that water was drained off of the hillside, so that just things like that. And then with Phil, it was people were asking like, oh, what if you could move the whole house on tracks, or what? It got like the track thing got really interesting, because it was like, well, how are we going to move it? How are we going to bring power to it?
Yep.
And I remember Phil just sort of like, kind of like stopping and laughing. He's like, I don't know. We haven't built it. We haven't like solved for it yet, but like, we're here to sort of like ask the big questions. So that was fascinating. And then, there were challenges along the way, not really architecturally, but like, a tree will fall down, pool water, the county will drive by and say it's a wetland. And then you have to like mitigate for that, or, steel prices going up, or things, just, we had a flat roof going in. But then the county was like, where are the gutters? I'm like, there's no gutters. So then we switched it to like a slightly pitched roof. So the water, so there were things to solve. And one interesting thing for me was, I kind of thought, and the permit process is really grueling. It's a long process, especially on a big site, because we had to drill a well. We had to
Yeah,
put in
wow.
a septic field. And so I thought like, oh, once we get the permit, like we're done. Like we'll just build what's in the permit, and that's mostly true. But there were in that spirit of evolution, there were things after design development into construction where we like moved the roof, where we had to move the roof from flat to pitched, or we had we went in for permit with basically the whole sort of compound on the plan. So we had the studio, we had the house, we had the carport, the well house.
Yep.
And there was, but
because the relationship to each piece is sensitive. Yeah, they can all move to where they need to be or adjust, but if one adjusts, does it mean the others stay static? Or what was the purpose of it? What was the journeying space? All those pieces makes a difference to, as you say, it's a compound. Whether you build them all or whatever, they've got to be positioned well, whether it's creating wind tunnels, view vistas, path journeys, just all those things. It's kind of crazy that you wouldn't do it all at once, and at least get it on a permit once, because then you've at least got the right. You can start to alter it from there if you need to.
Yeah, exactly. And there were things in from a craft perspective when we went to go build it, the front door is 1,200 pounds and it's a pivot. And at that moment, there wasn't really a hardware technology. So we basically built it from scratch to make that door pivot. And the crew that worked on it used an axle off a Ford semi-truck.
Yeah, right. To make it work.
Inside with a counterweight. And then we also had to engineer it just so that you couldn't slam it, that it would. So there's I think it's
also so it wouldn't crush you.
The crew would wouldn't crush you. Yeah. And so there's a hydraulic actuator inside with a counterweight to and then when we moved into the house after we put in a 40-foot steel gate, and because we had this sort of design language of that front door, we were able to hack the off the shelf part that pretty much every electronic gate opens, and we paste it to match the pace of the door. So you enter the site from the main road, but it's like a 600-foot drive through the woods once you get through our gate to get to our house. So everything is really to a brand perspective, everything is really calculated and strategic about how we experience it, and then how you would experience it if you came over. And a lot of the craft work that happened in the house on the steel front, we brought those guys into the studio project.
Right.
And the studio project, once we had been in the house for, I guess it was 4 or 5 years, then I started to investigate the studio project, and Tom and the team had kind of engineered all of it in the plans. And as I started to travel and investigate the railway, there were things that we had envisioned at the time that we did the plans that, as we revisited them, to your point about editing, I would call up, or I would email Tom, and I would just be we had this concrete sort of U-shaped structure where the rails would sit on the top of the concrete, almost like a light rail. Yep. But it got really complex in terms of engineering. And I remember just emailing him and going and talking to the guys that we were working with and just saying, what if we just did it old school? What if we just
put down some bass and some sleepers and tracks?
Yeah. We'll put down 6 feet of ballast, some sand. And he's like, yeah, great. Let's. So sometimes editing happens, I think, for budget, but I actually think sometimes editing happens for budget and it makes it better, right? If you can do it, if you can pull it off with fewer moves. And so we built we built the railroad track first. The railroad track was here for a year and a half or 2 years. And then we started on the studio. And this basically, Olsen Kundig, they detailed out the structure we had it structurally, it was structurally engineered just as the house, but we kind of treated it almost like an industrial object because it's not on foundation because it moves. So we basically took the schematic three-dimensional drawings from the plan set, and we turned that almost like into a Lego instruction book.
Yeah,
So
wow.
we created basically an inventory with this group called Alpine Welding out of Twisp, which is where the rolling huts are, and Delta Shelter. That's
Right.
it's in kind of like mid like northern mid part of Washington State, and they fabricated the structural frame and all the pieces with an inventory of parts into almost like
I'm like,
like basically an inventory. And then they came over and they everything in the house was pretty much custom except for like lighting, some lighting and appliances.
mm-hmm.
Everything in the studio, with the exception of the lighting, was completely custom because there's no studio that exists. So they made the wheels on the lathe. They did all
right. So you didn't just go and buy train wheels?
No, because also it's the railroad track it's 15 feet between the rail and standard track in the US. It's like 4.5 feet.
Right.
Because it's
gotcha.
28 feet tall. It weighs 35,000 pounds. It has to have a wider base to sit on. So it's when people come over for the tour, I say it's the widest. I actually submitted to Guinness, but because our studio doesn't pull another car, they didn't consider it a train. But as far as I know, it's the widest track, shortest private railway in the world, and tallest.
I love it. I love it. The big caboose. Caboose.
Yeah. And there were
drag up some photos of it, or your website on it. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, you might have to.
Yeah, we'll add some photos as well.
Yeah, you might have to share. But the story I was going to tell about challenges was that we had to figure out how to bring power. And originally, Phil was thinking that we would have this gigantic reel that would be at the end of the
kind of wind in and wind out,
and we would use the electrical cord could travel with the train as it moved back to the house and then back to the forest, and that was and that's true. Ended up the reel be a car. So we ran power from the house all the way underneath the train to the end. And then we embedded we had a reel made custom, like an industrial reel, and we had it mounted underneath the car. But the problem was that it needed to be super big, bigger than we were anticipating. And so we had to invent a bench inside the car to hide the reel.
Okay.
And that wasn't planned, but in a caboose, there's benches. There's multiple benches.
Yeah.
So again, that was one of those things where we had to sort of solve for it, but then we had to also make sure that it was something that we not just solve for, but that would be something that would be true for this kind of. The biggest thing, honestly, the two biggest things I think, which really made it went from good to great, was that originally we had a wheel that we were going to use to turn, to not really turn because it goes straight, but to make it go left or make it go right.
Okay,
and,
sure.
And when I was doing my research, I would go down to this train yard in Seattle where you could literally walk right up to the freight trains. And I met this guy who worked for BNSF, which is one of the big railroads here. And we became really good friends. And he had a lot. I was there, I showed up in my M2 and I was taking pictures of the trains. And he was up in the tower looking down on my M2. So he was wanted to ask me about my car and I wanted to ask him about trains. And we became really good friends. And as I was telling him about the project, he said, well, if you really want to be legit like railroad, then you need to find this thing, which is a General Motors, the car company made back in the day. It's a locomotive control panel. And so I did some searching and actually found one in South Korea that used to run on trains here in Washington, then was decommissioned, and they shipped them over there because they have looser regulations on the lifespan of the unit. And we were able to buy one off eBay, and it's a completely analog. You put this brass key into it, it's just switches. There's no digital components. So we had to build a complete electric drive system for the train from scratch, basically. Wow. So when you're talking about hot rodding,
it's hot rodding.
this train has literal parts from Detroit, both General Motors and Chevy. I think. And so we had to make the control panels talk to a digital motion control device and then talk to an analog motor.
Yeah, wow.
But when you get in and when you come over and you put this brass key in and you run it like you'd run a train locomotive. So like a couple of weeks ago we had folks over and they had a little kid who was like 2 and then like 5, and they both got to do it.
To drive the train.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the beauty. I know Tom talks about it with the Chicken Point with the big,
big wheel.
It's like, and I think this was kind of like an Eames thing as well, where if you design for the extremes, like either end of, you sort of solve for the middle, right? And so like, a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old can operate this train, get their ticket, get their sticker, and drive like this moving house. And I remember when we had the track in, and we just had, I think I sent you a video. It was just the steel.
You did, yeah.
My wife came outside and we were like, look, and we ran it with a generator down the track. And it's like your mind, you've seen like a car go fast or a truck but you don't see
a house or
a building move on a railroad track. Like it suspends disbelief. And I think when people come over, they see the photos of it, but like to your point, until they're here and they see the scale of something that big with little 15-inch wheels moving on a railroad track, like it does feel like Willy Wonka, like it's very mad. Like,
but isn't that magic? That is the magic, isn't it? I mean, the other thing that's magical with it is, and I remember hearing this, you talking about this, is, just where you start and stop it on the track determines the light, the sound, the way the light's coming through the forest or hitting the forest. It's very in its landscape, and whether you're upstairs or downstairs, again, I mean, I can imagine like how easy it would be to go, I'll just live in the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
I find myself forgetting, like I'll come out here in the morning because I usually leave it at the end, and so
so you walk out to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what happens is that when it's nested with the house, because it's got steel, it acts as almost like a shade for our windows into our bedroom.
Yep.
So, at night you wouldn't be able to tell, but like during the day, like literally you can walk in our entry, turn right and look almost like 100 feet down the hallway and see it at the end, see the track.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So my routine usually is I walk out in the morning, get in, and then I'll come back for lunch with my wife.
You drive back or you
drive back. Yeah. I'll come and then I'll head back out, and sometimes I'll stop midway and then I'll end up at the end and then I'll walk home. But sometimes I'll leave it at the house, it just depends. And what's great is I can go up, if I leave it next to the house, I can go upstairs up the ladder and I can see if anything's on the roof.
Yeah, right. Yeah, can see any gutters you need to clean.
Yeah. So it's really, and I have a log and I log every day when I'm in it, how many times I go and
that's a little bit obsessive compulsive, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little, and the inside is turned into, I remember when Tom came over and I think he was like, the first time he saw it and he got to run it and, he's like, oh, wow. But I think and you'd have to ask him sometime, but I think what he was most excited about was sort of like the inside is like this, like a museum of like railroads and branding and design and the local area. And so he created this canvas for me to play with. And because the walls are rolled steel, I can continually move things. Like we did it like not last summer, but the summer before, Apple came here and did a shoot. And they're like, we need you to take everything down. And so like I took pictures, but then I didn't put it up
the same
way. And so I'm constantly, if you came here today versus in 6 months, there would be different artifacts and
my studio is similar. Like, like I'll end up with a piece of brick or a plug of rammed, or I was on a client site and we're walking along and we're going past like a old disused building, and it was a bit rainy and kind of probably Seattle type weather. And I looked down and I went, oh, looks like there's a spoon or something in the ground. I could just see a bit of handle. So I reached down and I pulled it out of the dirt and kind of shook it off. And I said to the owner, I said, oh, there you go. You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. and handed it to him. And he goes, no, man, mine was golden, yours silver. And he gave it back to me. And so I have that. And I have an old, like silver, well, actually tin Johnny Walker water jug that's beat up that I found in a house that was being demolished. It was under the basement. And I said to the clients, do you want this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, do you mind if I have it? No, absolutely, take it. So I have things like that around as well as bits of work. And I've got like a piece of a horn of a buffalo that a friend of mine chopped off, and it just, I don't know, it's just stuff. It's stuff, and it's mixed in with modern stuff, but I've got some, just things like bottles that I might have picked up somewhere that have got a really nice color or a really nice shape. They're just kind of bits of junk that, but they're still bits of junk that matter. And on my left-hand side, a lot like you've got a wall of all pictures of things, and I've got a wall that is just, everything on there is taped on with a bit of blue masking tape, and it just kind of hangs there. But it's like not reminders as much, it's just ideas, or it might be a thing or whatever. Yeah, like your wall. And I can relate to all those pieces. And then I have some models that are lying around, cardboard models of houses and stuff, where I've been working out how a shape might work or what might happen with it.
You kind of have to live with it. I mean, the first floor is really about working, but upstairs is a full library, and I have projects pinned up there that I'm working on that I can't necessarily have people see when they come.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's a work in progress, and I like to say that when I come out here, it's sort of like I get to sort of leave. I get to take all the inputs from the clients, and then I sort of like take the ones I want to. And when I come out here, it's a little bit of a trip, like an adventure, and I'm leaving a little bit of sort of what's normal behind.
Yeah, absolutely. The day to day, you
bring it back. So.
You transition, not transition in your case. Yeah. I think that's an important factor, though, in having clarity in your mind and where you go and how that works for you.
Yeah. I know we're at the end. So
yeah, well, we're time limit wise, you've got an appointment to go to. So we will add a whole bunch of different pictures to this. I've got one last question, which is not my normal question, but if you were going to do it all again, let's just say that you had the opportunity to move to another state that you wanted to move to, and you were going to do it all again, what would you choose? Let's say you could keep this house as well, but then you weren't getting rid of it. What would you choose to do for another adventure?
Yeah, architecturally.
Well, architecturally and business-wise and everything, like, you might still run your business, and a lot of your values are tied to both pieces. So, go architecturally. What would you do?
I mean, so we bought the lot next to us, which is another 20 acres, because we didn't want someone building there, and it's right behind the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably not answering your question directly, but we are in the R&D process. We're planning like 1,000 to 1,200 square foot like family cabin. Right. That would be maybe a little bit more a mix, like poured like architectural concrete poured, not exactly not what we did here, but more of a range. Like if you looked at like the Brain Studio or the Pierre or Tai River cabin, and something that's more kind of discoverable in the forest versus a view play. And that's next. Like we actually are doing that.
Yeah. Wow.
Like that's
awesome.
That's our plan, is to have some, instead of having, because we did look years ago, we looked at like other land, maybe in somewhere else in Washington, or to like do like a family cabin, but we love it so much here. But we think that this could be sort of like a completely different experience with a completely different entrance, but pathways that could connect the two. The train's not going to go there, but a new journey, and it could eventually be something where our kids come back and take over this, and my wife and I move over there, but we would still be close. So that's what's next.
That's exciting. That's really, really exciting. I can't wait to see what develops. Yeah. It's like you've given yourself quite a high platform to step off and achieve the next adventure from. And everybody's going to be looking to see what you do with it.
No pressure.
No pressure, man. No pressure. Yeah, you went big on this, so the next one's got to be equally. It's got to take people, and people will make the comparison. People will, and at the end of the day, I go back to Rick Rubin. It's not about them, it's about you. I'm going to let you go. Take your call.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it,
buddy. Take care. Talk soon. Cheers, man. Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.